I'm back here with Lee from the Metal Prognosis, and today we're doing a sort of mix comparison. We each did a mix of, and we're going to have two videos in this series on both a more analog style or sort of acoustic in the room, out of the box recording versus a more digital in the box session with the same tracks. So today we're going to be going through the analog version and playing through our mixes of that. And Lee, if you want to explain a little bit about your band and the recording session that this happened in.
So this was done many, many moons ago with my band Shadows at Bay. We decided to do, well, a lot of bands are doing these days, where they go into a studio purely to track drums and then take those tracks into their home studios or another studio to track everything else and mix and master and whatever else they're going to do. So we did exactly that. Can't remember if it was 9 or 11 songs in one day for the drummer. So it was a huge day for him. And brilliant effort. Absolutely brilliant effort for him. So definitely tip off my hat for that effort. Unfortunately, the recordings that we used, the drummer ended up injuring his arm and couldn't play drums anymore. So he had to take a fair few years off. And during that whole period, we didn't want to mix it, we didn't want to release it, just out of respect out of him, just to see what was going to happen and where things were going to lie. But unfortunately, the worst happened where he decided to wave the white flag, for lack of a better term, and leave the band. And by that time, the songs had already evolved and changed into something else. So we actually never released this early stuff. So the tracks that I sent you are pretty much all the final stuff, ready to go and ready to rock. So the fact that we're doing this project, from a sentimental perspective, is awesome because we get to bring it back to life, see what it really like. And also I can send it to him as well. He lives on the other side of Australia now, but at least he can have that in his collection too, to go, yep, this is me at this time and this is what we got to achieve.
I didn't know the backstory before, so yeah, it's it's cool. It'll be cool for him too. So yeah, props to your drummer. What's his name?
Matt, or Matthew.
Good drumming, Matt. And what was the kind of equipment you were using in the studio?
From what I remember, we had it on a Pro Tools system. Like, I couldn't even tell you much of the mics and that we used. I think we used some 57s for the snare and the toms, and I can't tell you anything else just because I cannot remember. I looked at the drum pictures that we took, and I zoomed in because it was so long ago. The quality's bad, so I couldn't even see what the noise was back then.
Fair enough.
Which, in a way, which we're going to touch on soon, I don't actually mind because from an engineering perspective, you're not locked into tunnel vision. Like, if that's a certain mic, this is how I want to approach it instinctively. Pros and cons.
Yeah. What kind of amps were you using on the guitars and bass?
The bass we used a brand called Custom. Yeah, they're American because I'm thinking it had an American flag on it.
Yeah, that's a sign.
That's a good sign. So that was just a combo bass amp, which is really cool. I've actually still got it in the other room. So that lasted. And the guitars, I had the 11 rack running through some old Marshall speakers, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
And just mic'd them up that way.
Yeah. Now, is the 11 rack, that's not a digital unit, is it? Or?
It is.
It is, okay. Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. It is a
digital unit, but I just turned off the in-house cab simulators for it and used the Marshall speakers for it.
Sort of early modeling unit.
I just didn't know enough about modeling back then to really invest much time and effort into it. So
yeah, fair enough. I mean, back then navigating the menus on those old units was a real pain. So
yeah,
every time I used something like that, I started with a Spider 2 from Line 6. And I did love that amp because it was all I had, and it was great to have all the effects and stuff. So I had no complaints at the time, but people kept telling me online it was a bad amp. So eventually I believed them and went out and bought a cheap tube amp that was had its own problems. So, but all right, well, very good. We're gonna roll these mixes, and after that, you'll see our breakdowns of what we did in the mixes, and then we're gonna have a little chat about what we think about the mixes and comments, critiques, and all that. So we'll see you on the other side.
Time to look under the hood of the analog mix here to see what's going on. So running through in order, we have got our guitars. So our guitars, I've grouped them off and coloured them. But on our bus channel here, if we have a look, I've just done a basic EQ and I've just got a bit of a noise suppressor going. I mean, it looks like it's working pretty hard now, but once it's actually doing this thing, it's not actually doing that much. It's mainly for the outro to make it nice and smooth and the transitions in between each of the takes. And the guitars, they just sounded fine as it was. And I think this comes down to capturing them correctly to start with. If you take your time to do the sound check and get what you want, there's very little work to do here. So this is what they sound like as is. Get the main riff because that's the fun part. So yeah, not much going on there, but that's fine. So for these lead guitars here, I just got the Wavers stomp box just to get a bit of phase happening, a little bit of reverb just to help blend it in and give us something a little bit more to add a little spark to the overall song. Bass, very straightforward. Now with the bass, there's nothing going on with these. These are all just dry. But in the bus, what I've got is just a little bit of a pass there to help plant with the bottom end. Once again, I've got another noise suppressor there. And this time I'm using, which is what I used a fair few times in the past, is the Chris Lord bass little plug in there. So let's solder that and quickly hear it. Because I really want to hear that chug and that big vroom, vroom, vroom with all the notes. And I feel like I get a really nice capture with this. Because if I turn it off, this is what we start with. A bit crappy. So add it in now. Especially with the verse. Got that nice twang little push to it, which I really, really liked and worked well. So now moving on to the vocals. So with the vocals, what do we got here? So on the actual vocal track, I've got nothing happening. So I've just worked on each individual channel by themselves. So what I did, come up here, I have the Chris Lord, again, going through with the vocal things, which I use a lot when doing vocals. And I've also got a little bit of a de-easer there just to help with some of that top end unwanted register in my voice that I have. So just to play a little bit of the vocals by themselves, this is what we're running.
I'm growing. As you try to break what's already broken, but the damage is already done.
As you can see, it just takes out a little bit of that top end of the vocals just to clean it up a bit to make it easier for everyone's ears. Now, the biggest one is drums. This took me the absolute longest by far. So to try and give you as quick as a tour as I can, I got 2 kicks here. I use one as a kind of a click and the other one as like a sub bottom end, which is kind of my intention when we originally mic'd this up. Snare, same thing, the top to be the snappy part and the bottom just to help bring that ringingness of the springs. Hi-hats, I ended up taking them out because there was plenty in the overheads in the room mix for that. And the same with the ride, I ended up taking that out because it was just overkill. And I also took out the 2 room mics here because they were only adding mush and it wasn't good. So straight take them out. So the biggest, let me just play the drums for you and I'll talk through just a couple of issues I had in the journey. So sounding a little bit not the best, but it's not too bad in the actual mix. So with the drums here, the kick I had a lot of trouble, and being an analog mix, let me bring up everything that I'm doing here. So here's a kick, the tight kick. My first instinct was add a trigger to it. But then I thought, no, this is an analog mix. Don't do that. Just use what you would. So got just a basic gate there to help clean it up. I did my own EQ band here to try boost it, and then did another EQ, post it all to try and help get it. And I put a limiter here because as you can see, if you can see in this little section here, for example, we have a few little spiky spots that in all honesty, I just couldn't be asked going through and editing. So I just put a limiter there just to cap that off there, just stop it peaking, because noise-wise you can't tell, but it does actually peak and make some not good sounds. So this one, so this is in a kick, just did a bit of a clean up there, add a SSL EQ, just to give it a bit more bottom richness there, which is good. Toms did all the same in regards to had a gate and SSL EQs. And this one I tried something different. I had the EMO plug-in here to try compress it and try work with it. And it was purely to experiment and just have some fun, really. I've used it for a couple of times at recordings and all that, but it was just a really nice excuse to pull it out and not just rely absolutely on SSL stuff, which I do like a lot. So there we have it. There is a quick basic rundown of my analog mix that I did, that I definitely had a little bit of hiccups here and there, especially with the drums, trying to get them to sound decent. But yeah, overall, I'm happy with the overall mix, especially with not needing to touch the guitars. So there we have it. I'm very keen to see what Nick has come up with in his approach, but I definitely try to do as minimum as possible to it and to see if I can let it breathe and do its own thing. And it definitely was a challenge, but a lot of fun.
break this down, shall we? So the first step when getting tracks from someone else, I like to just organize them. I set up the order of everything as I like it, as well as colorize the tracks. You know, people have different orders that they put the drums in. I always do it the same way pretty much. Kick up at the top, and then snare, and then toms, and overheads, rooms, reverbs last. Then we have guitars. This has an interesting guitar arrangement with a whole bunch of different parts. And then we have bass. Both the guitars and the bass in this project are kind of split up into a bunch of different chunks, and they're on different tracks. I'm not sure entirely why. Maybe Lee can enlighten us with that. And then we have vocals, lead vocals, seconds, stereo seconds, and then more seconds. Lots of harmonies. That's cool. I like that. So once I've got my tracks set up here, I've got everything the way I like it, routed into buses and whatnot. Then with acoustic drums, I always want to check the phase. So I went through, checked the phase, I lined up the overheads with the snare, just getting the transient of the overheads and the snare to be dead on. And same with the rooms, though I left them with a little bit of sort of delay. So there's a tiny bit of extra, realism, I guess. The rooms shouldn't be perfectly phase aligned, I think. But if you go too far, it can sound weird too. So I just did that by ear. Phase alignment is important, and making sure there's no edits I need to do. Now in this case, the engineering is good, so I didn't really edit anything. And I didn't, time align the drums or anything. I don't know if anything like that had been done already in the studio, but on my end, I did not do any sort of drum editing. I like to start with the drums on pretty much every project if I'm just mixing a finished song like this. The way I've been working recently, and what I'm continuing to do, is using this channel strip, the SSL native channel strip, and I've got an instance of this on pretty much all of the individual close mics for the drums. I didn't do any simple replacing or augmenting. I just did the EQ and whatnot. I've got gates on everything pretty much, set up the noise gates. I've got compressors, and then it's got an EQ. It's a pretty simple setup. Most people are familiar with SSL stuff. So that's what I'm using for all of these individual drums. Of course, I dial these in just by ear. I don't even use the presets on them. Sometimes I do, but in this project, I didn't. I just wanted to do it all natural, as it were, just using my ear and doing what I do. That was sort of step one. On the snare, I've got this barrier, which is a free plugin. It's sort of a distressor. I just use this to add some extra grit and distortion to the snare to make it a little bit fatter, thicker. And I've also got a limiter on the snare and the kick. I do that oftentimes, especially with acoustic drums and even samples, where I just feel like I want the kick and the snare louder, but they're already maxed out. So I use the limiter to push them even harder. And it's just a nice little trick to sort of push those even further into the front of the mix when you feel like they need more power. I set up an extra reverb aux send, and I've got this Convology, which is a IR reverb on that, just to send some of the extra shells, the snare and toms, into that for an extra level of reverb. And that's also being compressed. And then I have a room bus. This one I am hitting really hard with a fast attack and a high level of compression to really try to drive the rooms. That's another trick I like to do. I like to keep my rooms kind of loud and very compressed to just give extra fatness and density to the whole drum mix, because that can be a tricky thing when you're working with acoustic drums in a metal context, is trying to make them sound as huge as possible and aggressive, and you don't want them to sound weak and thin. So those are some of the things that I like to do, is really slam the rooms, try to give it some extra girth. I also have this supercharger, which is another free plugin. This is just a parallel compressor, and I'm using this on the drum bus. It brings up the body of the drums and the body of the cymbals. So if I just play a little bit here. It's pretty subtle there, and you may not hear a huge difference. I'm not really trying to change the tone of the drums here. I can hear that it gives a little more resonance to all the shells. With the guitars, they're already amped, so I didn't really do anything. I'm not reamping. The goal with this mix was to just use what I'd been given and just make it, polish it up, sound as good as possible, without like going back to the drawing board, because I have the digital version of this mix where I can use any amp I want. So this one, I wanted to do the opposite. I'm using the channel strip again here. I'm not using the dynamics at all. They're off. I'm just using some compression. I'm giving it a bit of low end. I'm doing the standard sort of trimming off the ultra lows and the ultra highs on electric guitars that I always do. I am sort of dealing with the fizziness on these guitars. And again, if I show you sort of with and without the effects, I just have this and a second EQ here. Nothing too drastic, but I wanted to give the guitars a little more body and reduce some of the sort of fizziness. They sound a little thin to me, so here is with and without that on one of these rhythm sections. It's pretty subtle, and I'm just sort of trying to clean up the guitars a little bit, and I'm not trying to drastically change them. On the second part here, this verse, I am using for that section, I do have an extra chorus and delay, and I think there's already some effects on those guitars, but I just wanted to give them a little extra something. Bass is pretty simple. I've just got both of these tracks going to the same bus, and I've got, again, this supercharger here. Then I've got the Big Goat, which is a Big Muff emulation. You can see it's only mixed in 50%, so sort of a parallel fuzz effect. I'm going into this Ampeg amp, which I like. And this phaser is automated for this tom section near the end of the song. And then the EQ, again, it looks kind of drastic here, but just trimming out the ultra sub lows, and I found that it needed a lot of mid boost. It doesn't sound like honky, a lot of mids, but it is giving it some extra mids where I feel like it needs it in the mix, and it makes the guitars sound thicker. That's just sort of an overall balance EQ. I think it needed it. The vocals, this is, I suppose, the fun part. It's pretty similar. In fact, I just copied it over from what I did in the other mix. If you've seen that video, I did tweak it and change it a little bit. We've got the SSL first, just to do our basic EQ, first stage of compression. Then I'm running into this Sans Amp BOD. This is a free plugin. This is where I'm getting my drive from. I like how it sounds on vocals. It's cool. Got a blend knob so you can do a parallel drive. The first mix that I've tried on for vocals, but I really liked how Lee's voice sounded with the kind of aggressive distortion, and it cleans up nicely in his softer parts, and when he pushes it, it really gets more distorted, and I thought that was a really cool effect that helps the song a lot. I am also running it through this a guitar cab, just to give it a bit more of a sort of lo-fi radio sound, I guess, more mid-focused. I've got the CLA 76, again, just hitting it with some more compression. I like to do multiple stages of compression in vocals to really kind of flatten them totally out, but in a way that sounds natural. The vocal doubler, this is a free plugin, kind of a chorus effect, but a nice one with some unique controls. I like this. I use it on vocals a lot. I try to keep it so it's not too extreme, but it adds some nice sort of depth and width to the vocals. Got the Convology again for some reverb, and then a limiter, again, just to trim the tops off the vocals to keep it in place. This is an automated lo-fi effect. This is sort of the radio voice effect, and that's automated for one of the sections. And then it's running everything through this vocal bus, which has this Fresh Air, which is another free plugin, and it's cool. Just gives it sort of a nice, smooth top-end sparkle and a little bit of extra EQ where it needs it, just to clean everything up and make it sit well. As far as these production tricks, I've got this automated lo-fi effect. Fine. Lock your heart through the key. It's just a cool bit for that section, I thought. Make it go kind of lo-fi, and then it comes back in for the big chorus there. And then I did trim out a few sections in the vocals where or in the harmonies rather, I wanted to sort of build up the harmonies more incrementally in this section here. It's just a little arrangement thing. And then the bass, I have this phaser that comes on in this bass and tom section. And on the master bus, there is another sort of lo-fi filter effect that just sort of sucks the bass out before letting it back in for the drop. And I like to do that on a lot of things. And then my master is very simple here. I've got the bus compressor and I've got a limiter. It's dead simple. That's the whole mix. The acoustic drums are a little more difficult, of course, than samples, but overall, it was pretty much the same process, and I think it came out pretty good. Back to you, future Nick and Lee.
All right, so let's have a quick chat about the analog mixes then. Two really cool, different approaches, which I'm really excited about. And as much as I had my own little hurdles to jump doing my own mix, listening to yours, Nick, was just a whole new level of excitement and unknown, which I loved. So if you don't mind, I was going to throw you a few compliments first on how you approached it and how I heard it.
Yeah.
So firstly, how you approached the snare really blew me away. So when I first heard the snare, that was a real highlight for me in the overall mix. And listening to your breakdown, how you did it was just fascinating. So you really did bring that snare to not just a whole new level, but it really made it sound more like you're in the room with the drummer, if that makes sense. A nice, loud, cracky, but also boomy. And it wasn't too ticky where it's ear-piercing, but it still blended through the mix really nice, but still having that dynamic that I really enjoyed in my snare. So he did exceptionally well with the snare, first and foremost. Not just a snare, but as a starting point, he did really, really well.
Snare is like one of the key components, I think. If that's
Definitely.
good on a song, that's like not to be overlooked. And it's difficult, I'll say, with the analog, with the acoustic drums to get everything to fit right. And for this project, I didn't want to trigger anything, so which I'm glad we both avoided doing.
Yeah.
And it's definitely difficult when you're not gonna trigger, you're not gonna sample, enhance things, or do any too crazy studio tricks. So, which they didn't have back in the day so much. Though we've had samples longer than I think most people realize, myself included.
Oh, definitely. Triggering, yes. It was good that we actually didn't speak about if we were going to use triggers or not. And I'm really happy that we both didn't go down that path, because my first instinct, because I had a lot of trouble with getting the kick sounding as I wanted it to. My first instinct was, let's trigger it and let's find a nice blend. And I was like, nope, we're going analog. Stay away from that. Let's see what I could do.
Yeah.
The drums were purely one take. So no timelining, no mucking around with it, because I think you brought that up in your section about timelining. None of that at all. It was all what he performed is what we had.
That's awesome. And one take is really impressive too.
Especially with drums, because I don't mind crossfading some drums acoustically when they're done to clicks, but I'm so glad I didn't have to with this one.
Yeah.
The drummer was that inspired to do a good enough job in one hit. If he wasn't happy, he stopped the take and started again fresh.
Yeah. Well, he did.
And he didn't need to do that
job.
many times. So, yeah. No, his preparation was spot on, and it really shows. I'm just going to answer another one of your questions that you had in your breakdown, was you asked about the chopping up of the guitars.
Yes.
So that was something I did with the bass player. I'd normally do it with musos as well, where I just record in sections instead of getting him to do one big take. Mainly just to take the stress off. Because if they go through 3 minutes of the song and they stuff up, or a wrong note's hit or something, they don't have to start again. They don't have to stress. They can get their train of thought just on the one section that needs to be done, and that is it. So I kind of got into the same flow with my guitaring as well, where I would just be hitting the same section over and over and doing whatever parts I want for whatever dynamics I'm trying to create, and keep doing that till I move on.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's why when you saw the files, they'll all, grouped
Yeah,
off.
because I was, looking at it from the standpoint of being given tracks from someone else. A lot of it's like, and we didn't discuss too much before about like, what everyone's, what your vision was in this project, which I think is cool because, I'm just approaching it from a sort of fresh slate. Like, for example, the bass, I've got 2 DI tracks and I just kind of assume automatically, well, one's probably like the clean bass, one's the dirty bass, or, same thing with the guitars. And I think there was some labeling, I knew that one of them was like a centered track because you already had 2 rhythm tracks. And I know that you like to do that too. So,
Yeah.
which I never do, but, yeah, so that's interesting. And when you're getting tracks, to me, it's like I automatically want to figure out why they're on 2 tracks rather than why didn't you comp the take and just do a crossfade and bounce 1 track. Which either way works, with different instruction, but without instruction, it's sort of like, what is your vision for this? What do you want? So, but then I saw you were bussing the bass together in your own mix. So I thought, okay, well, maybe you're just, who knows?
And another thing too is, I will confess, I was absolutely under no train of thought to hand these files to anyone else.
Yeah.
So I didn't think they were ever going to leave only my site.
Well, that's fair.
Now, I'm not afraid. Like, I don't care that they're going out. It's really cool because this is a great little thing that we're doing. But
Yeah.
I definitely didn't think they were going to leave my site.
Yeah. Well, and I will say too, like the, overall the engineering and I didn't really have to do a whole lot of tweaking, and when you're mixing something, you don't want to be, lost in trying to do all your own edits and figure out like what the band is trying to communicate with these tracks. So it's definitely appreciated when they come through clean and the edits are there. And, I think especially for the analog mix, besides maybe some little arrangement things, I didn't change anything. I didn't edit the drums. I didn't worry about, is there crossfades, is there pops in here from bad fades or, so yeah, the overall engineering on both sides was good. And so I had very little to do there, which is how you want it.
Yes, absolutely.
And
you want to make it as easy as possible for the other person involved.
Exactly.
Always.
And Chris Lord Alge had a good video on this where he talked about how he works with, he's got 3 guys that the 3 of them are a team, and he's the mixer. And there's a guy who does sort of all the engineering stuff, and there's one of them who does all the recording. And he's managing the band as well as setting up the mics and stuff, and then hands the files to someone else who does the editing, and then that goes off to Chris Lord Alge, who's just doing the mixing. And he knows exactly how everything's laid out because he works with the same team. And most of us obviously aren't that caliber of mixer where we can work with people like that, but it's definitely appreciated when you're working with another band, especially if they're like a paying client, and it's like, I don't want to bill for a whole bunch of editing or something, but yeah, so good on you for providing clean tracks and everything. Both the recording of everything was good and the edits, so
No, I'm glad that was easy for you.
Yeah.
But I will confess, because I haven't done full analog mixing like that for many, many moons. It did take me a long, long time, especially with the drums. I felt like the drums took me probably 80% of the actual overall mixing experience, trying to get them right. And I think I ended up taking out 3 of the tracks. Just because they were too messy and they were only creating mush. They weren't adding anything positive to it, no matter where I put them in the mix. So I just took them out.
Yeah.
And I still found the dynamics for all those rest of the drum hits through their other mics or respected mics, which, I found interesting as well. But also, I liked that I had more to play with than less. So I felt a little bit privileged knowing that, I've got room to be able to do that and just to be able to play and muck around a bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, it definitely took me a long time to get the drums, guitars. A little bit biased on the guitars because I invested all the time getting the sound I wanted to start with. So when it came to the end, I was like, it's already there. This is what I wanted to capture, and I got it. So job done on the guitar. That was it. But it was it was interesting.
For sure. Yeah. I agreed with you. Said you took out the extra hats and ride symbol, and I pretty much did that too. I didn't want to completely mute anything just because, I want to sort of work with what I've been given, but that there was the 2 overhead mics and then also an extra hat and an extra ride. And I did sort of leave the ride up a little bit because I thought it made the crashes louder. I didn't actually need really more of the ride in particular, but that's one thing with the acoustic drums. I kind of wish the crashes were louder and the hi-hat was quieter. But that is a problem that I have with my own drum kit, and most engineers, it's like for some reason a lot of people record an extra hi-hat mic, but unless you're playing it really quietly on a rock song, like usually there's too much hi-hat already, and you can't subtract it from the overheads, and like you don't need an extra mic on it. If you want, to throw extra mics on the other cymbals, maybe, but not the hi-hat. Just
the hi-hat really gets hit the hardest, and it just dominates so much of the overall ambience and the sound. Yeah.
No, it's got so much high frequency too, because I guess it's a smaller cymbal and the banging of the hats together. So,
I agree.
Yeah, and don't open up your hats too much. That's another thing. Like for any kind of metal and louder rock drumming, it's like I keep my hi-hats basically closed all the time. Not forcefully, but yeah, just if they're like, if you can see daylight between them, they're going to be a bangy mess, and they're going to ruin your drum tracks. So,
and the snare is going to be a nightmare to try clean up.
Yeah,
because all the bleed's going to go through
the drums. But I didn't have any problems on these tracks with the tuning of the drums, especially snare. Toms usually you can get away with it, but for the snare, if there's like a weird ringy overtone that you have to try to kill, it can be a real pain, and you can suck the life out of a snare trying to fix a problem, but then you end up with a different problem, which is that the snare sounds bad anyways. So I've run into that many times. So
now I'm just curious to ask you about your mix you did. So firstly, I'll say that I said a few things about your mix. So to continue on with things I'm talking about your mix. I was fascinated on your approach and your vision of how you dirtied up the guitars. Oh, not so much with the you thickened up the guitars more and made them a lot more punchier. It sounds a bit like a contradiction, but if you hear it, it makes sense.
Yeah.
But what you did with my vocals, I thought was really, really cool.
Yeah.
Like, because I'm so used to just singing more dry and just getting my fray in that nice, sweet spot while singing. And I never thought about, let's just like crank some distortion in there and do like the vocal double up that you had in there. I was just fascinated on that approach that you took with it.
Yeah.
And I think that's fascinating, and from an artistic perspective, awesome. Like, I'm really blown away on the different angle that you took with it and where your vision went.
Yeah, I actually was just playing around. I thought I wanted some grit on the vocals, which I don't always do, but and in fact, for my own vocals, I'm usually more shy to do that because I feel like, like throwing some distortion on there is somehow cheating or something. But with someone else's, I don't care. So I thought I wanted to go for a little bit of that. I don't really have any good examples off the top of my head, but just the more sort of lo-fi, like distorted, kind of old-timey radio voice sound where the mic is breaking up and everything. And so I wanted to capture a little bit of that vibe. And I just tried out that BOD plugin, which is like a SansAmp emulation. I've never used it on vocals before, but I just threw it on there as an experiment, and I loved it. I thought it was great, and I thought it suited your voice, and you have good dynamics in your performance. And so, the distortion of the vocals was really interesting. Like when you're singing really loud, it breaks up a lot, but then on the quieter sections, it's just a little bit in there. And so, I thought it worked well, and it happened to suit your voice really well. And there was times when I wanted like a little more aggression out of your voice, but like you're already singing loud and powerful. So it's like, well, we'll turn up the distortion. And yeah, I really love how the vocals came out. I think it was that plugin is a good one for doing vocal distortion, even though it's a bass plugin, but it just happens to work. And your voice and your singing style really complemented that kind of thing, even though I see from your own mixes that's not really what you had in mind, but it just happens to work. So, maybe keep it in mind for maybe for live shows or your next album.
And that I really like the EQ and volume swell that you did before the breakdown part of the song as well. That was really cool.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's anything like that, those little production stuff is just like, how can I, there's already plenty of energy in the song, but how can I, turn it up a notch as a producer and really sort of highlight to the audience, what I want them to feel and hear emotionally. So
no, very cool.
Yeah. And it's all like super simple stuff too. I mean, that's the other, all those EQ tricks, I do it a lot, just automating, either cutting out the bass or cutting out the highs and just automating draw a little automation line, and it sounds cool. And certainly a lot of like electronic guys do that. Your EDM DJs doing that little filter trick right before the bass drops. Yep. And I mean, hey, it works.
It does.
Yeah.
It definitely does.
So
do you have any other thoughts on your experience with it?
Yeah, well, I agree with your the drums took the longest, even though I don't think it took me too long. I mean, I would say overall, like the engineering was good enough, the drum sound and the performance was good enough that it wasn't hard to work with for acoustic drums, but acoustic drums take a lot more work, and there's just there's bleed issues, and no matter what you do, I've tried different mic positions and stuff on my own kit and tried to like reduce bleed, and there's some things you can do to reduce that on the recording, but these didn't have any exceptional bleed problems. Everything was worked well, so I got that done, and it took maybe 2 hours or so, though between the analog and the digital mix, like the digital mix I did first, and I got that done in a couple hours, and I checked it in my car the next day, and it sounded great, and I was like, okay, I'm not gonna touch it. The acoustic one, I had to go back and fix some stuff with the drums. I think this ended up being the 4th version of the mix I did, checking it on my monitors and then checking it in the car, and so I was happy that the other one didn't take so much work, but this one was a little trickier, but nothing out of the ordinary. And yeah, there's just always like getting the gates just right and all that kind of stuff. I don't think my one main sort of complaint on my end was I thought the guitars were sort of too fizzy on the top end, and I wanted more beef out of them. And so, but I couldn't, I didn't want to try to radically reshape things either, and totally like try to change the tone entirely. So it was just sort of subtle stuff, what I could do with basically adding a lot more kind of low mids. And I think a lot of people tend to cut the low mids to try to like clean things up and scoop it more. And I find on both bass and guitars and drums, I'm often adding low mids, cutting some of them in some cases, but then making sure to add it back in other places so that the whole mix doesn't have this kind of hollow spot where there's just not enough body there. And that then you end up with translation issues. I think it's better to, go for a sort of flatter overall EQ between the instruments. But yeah, it was fun to do, and I liked it's always fun to work with acoustic drums, and I've been doing just for the last maybe year or so trying to switch over to kind of only the SSL channel strip for like 90% of the drums. And it works well, you know, and it's partially like it saves me time and it saves me trouble, but I find it also just ends up, it works well, and you know, it's got almost everything I need. Usually it's only like maybe on rooms and reverb sends that I'm doing some pulling in different plugins, because if I can get everything else with the channel strip, it's already got a gate and an EQ and a compressor, and that's basically all I use most of the time. I think with the snare, I did add a little bit of distortion too, but other than that,
Okay.
it's just a little bit, and I like to do that with snares too. A little extra distortion. I often throw a limiter on the kick and the snare, and I like, you know, that helps to just make them that much louder for metal, at least. So yeah, I thought it was cool, and I assume that the bass tracks on that were the new takes, because they were the same as the other one, right? Yeah.
Correct.
But yeah, I'm surprised how much the guitars, even though they were two different takes, almost 10 years apart, how similar the guitars were from one version to the next. I wouldn't have really guessed that it was the same take, but yeah. And I think your arrangement of the guitars, both adding in the center track, which I never do, and it's interesting. It's a different approach. I don't know that I prefer it over just having hard pan tracks, and I kind of had that one pretty low, but it's something different. And I thought your harmony part in the first verse was really interesting, having three guitars all doing, you know, different single note harmonies. That was cool. And on both of those, I played with some different effects. So throw a little like extra delay and reverb. And I forget if you recorded those tracks with any effects on them. I think there may have been.
I don't think there was. I think the dry ones were just dry, and I did post effects on them.
Very cool. Yeah, I liked your mix of that too, and I thought yeah, the guitars, I liked your guitars on the analog version better than the digital version, actually. Even though, as I said, your guitar tone is different from what I would do. But yeah, it's got almost like a kind of black metal vibe. Like it's sort of a lot of high end. It's very aggressive. But I thought it worked well in the mix, and even though like the guitar tone on its own may not have been what I would go for, I thought in the context of the mix, it was nice, and I liked the effects you put on that in the first verse. We both did slightly different things, but I think you had a phaser on there, maybe.
Yeah, had a phaser. Yep.
So yeah, it was good, and you removed all the room mics in your mix, which was, I kind of did the opposite, which I thought was interesting. you said the rooms are terrible, and I was like, I like the rooms. So, but I like rooms in general. I process the room mics differently than like the overheads and the close mics, where I'm trying to go for more of a clean sound and just get like aggressive. The rooms, I like to squash and distort, and sometimes throw those through reverb and all kinds of funny things.
Yeah, I think because I started off with the rest of the drum kit first and ended up with the rooms, I think that's why I probably had a bit of trouble fitting them in and trying to find their place there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So probably if I did a reverse or did it in different order, maybe I might be able to find a really nice place for them. But yeah, how I approached it, I was like, nah, it's not adding anything positive at all.
No, it's true. I've sort of learned how I like to use room mics, and so I kind of start with that approach, and I tend to keep them up pretty loud. I mean, in terms of, you know, order of operations, you know, I'm usually working on the kick and then the snare, and then, you know, go to the overheads, and the room kind of gets last. But I know where, to me, the rooms are useful for bringing up body and, you know, and also the mids to the drums, just giving them that extra aggression and kind of realism. In most of my mixes, if I turn off the room mics, the drums sound very sort of like scooped, and, you know, they're clean, they're aggressive enough, but the rooms add like a whole vibe and character of just rawness and also beef in the mids, where on the close mics I've usually scooped out kind of all the mud on those, and the room mics is like where I add the mud back in in a controlled way that's like super compressed, and often I'll throw some distortion on there, like a distressor or whatever.
Yeah, well, because I'm gating all the things, so I gated, like yourself, all the toms, the snare and the kicks to try clean them up. Normally, if I take away the rooms, which has happened in previous mixes, it makes it sound too separated, the drums, where I feel like the room really opens it up and gives it that large type of dynamic to it, and kind of links them all up together with how they bleed and how they work with each other. I was lucky I didn't need that to rely on that for this mix, because I didn't do that. I took out the rooms, but definitely in the past, that's where I feel the rooms shine the most.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. They are definitely the glue, and you need something. It also helps cover up sometimes little artifacts from the gates, which I did notice sometimes in your mix, where there was some extra bleed coming in when the snare's hitting, cymbal bleed coming in. That not too much, but here and there. Yeah, it's really hard to deal with that stuff, especially without samples. I mean, samples make that much easier, and I tend to I've just found it way easier to work with a triggered kick. And when I'm recording my own drums, I'll just record a sample, so it's the same kick, whatever tuning it's at that I'm recording it's the same exact sound, and that's how I tell myself it's not cheating. But I mean, the real advantage to me is that then I have a kick that I can really like compress a lot, and I can add a ton of click to it without, every time the kick hitting, you hear like a little burst of hi-hat too. And that stuff just drives me crazy. Snare is a different problem, but I feel like triggering snare in a way that's realistic and doesn't sound too corny and over the top is difficult. So I basically never trigger any of the shells but the kick. But that alone can really make a drum kit sound way bigger, way easier. But yeah, for this one, there's no triggering involved.
Actually, you remind me of something that we spoke about in the previous videos that we did, where you asked me about monitoring if I use just speakers or cans. For this one, I actually needed to use cans to get my kicks right, because I just was not feeling the kicks through my monitors. And I used two different headphone monitors to try nail it to get it down, Pat, because I just could not get them, and I was struggling.
I think overall, I preferred the analog mix. I thought of the two mixes you did, I just thought it was maybe a little more raw. The digital mix was cleaner, but I really liked the sort of extra aggression, and it's maybe not quite as clean and like hi-fi, but for a rock song, that's who cares? I think I liked the vibe and the atmosphere of this mix.
Thanks.
It was, it had good aggression, and I liked your bass tone on this. It's interesting how different the bass was, and we'll have to get to that in the other video, but I liked your bass tone on this analog mix way better. Not just the tone, mostly the low end, but I feel like you cut a lot more of the low end out in this one, and it fit really good in the mix. And overall I thought it was cool. And it's interesting too, since I'm used to hearing this song now with all that vocal distortion that I put on it, to hear it back again, like both your mixes were sort of like cleaner, just less, maybe a little less affected, and but I thought I did like what you did on the vocals on this a lot. There was a few parts I thought the backing vocals were kind of too loud, but overall it was nice to hear them really clearly, and I thought the lead vocals sounded great, and even without any extra distortion, they were plenty present and aggressive there. So I like those. It's a good effort. It's a good mix.
No, I appreciate it. And as I said to you before, like just seeing how your approach was just super fascinating, and from an artistic perspective, it's like neither of them are better. They're just really different, and I love both of them for really different reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is always the thing, and yeah, when you're working with a band, like trying to capture the vibe of what they're doing, you'd be mixing it very different if you were going for a classic rock sound or something, or an R&B band or whatever. So obviously we're these songs are both in the same vein, but it was good we didn't really like talk about too much going into it. So it was just sort of like being handed tracks from a band I don't know, just doing what I think makes it sound cool, which I think it's a different when you're working with a band in the studio and having been a band in the studio working with a different producer. It's like there's a lot of back and forth between the band and the mix engineer, and that can be very good. It can be a battle. It can be a bad thing too. It can sometimes end up with the mix engineer wanting to push it one way and the band wanting to push it a different way, and then you end up with a compromise that maybe neither party loves, but you're not going to kill each other. So it's fun to do a project like this where, on my own tracks, I can mix it however I want. But to, get tracks from another band and mix it however I want, and it's fun, without any input from the band, At this stage, it'd be like, okay, well, what do you want me to do differently before it's released? But so it's cool to do that, and you don't get to all the time. So
no, look, it was fascinating. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a lot different compared to what I've done in the past, even though it's my own song and I have approached my own songs before. But yeah, definitely with new technology and a new approach, and keeping it strictly analog compared to the next one that we're going to talk about, which is full digital. I thought it was just a real fun project to do. And even arguably funner, if you want to use that term, listening to what you did and listening to your breakdown and your reasons, and that was, like, I should have recorded a reaction video to how I reacted to yours. A lot of time I was sitting there like this going, yep, I get it, yep, I see where you're coming from, yep.
Right on. Well, yeah, it is. It's true. It's not every day you can hear your own band, taken a completely different direction by someone. So, I think that's part of the fun of this kind of project. So, and you're going to be putting out the stems, right, for people to mix if they want to have their own hand at this project and compare the different takes. And so, yeah, that'll be you can check the link in the description wherever it may be.
And also too, there's free royalties. So if you want to royalty free, I can't remember what the term is, but where you can just put it up on your own YouTube if you want to share it, just tag us in it so we know, so we can check it out and continue on this experience. But yeah, we're not going to monetize it or try to take money from you for doing it. It's free domain. I think that's the term I'm looking for, to go crazy with it.
Exactly right. So that's great. That's great. Well, yeah, thanks for checking this out. And I hope you've enjoyed this and see the different approaches we both had to this project. And in our next video, we're going to be talking about the in-the-box digital version with amp sims and sampled drums and all that. So stay tuned for that. And check out Lee's channel. And thanks for watching.